Alright everybody, now here we have it. Wesley against Magnus Carlsen, game number 1 at the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour Eruo Rapid Final 1. Okay, let's see. Magnus Carlsen with white pieces plays d4. Wesley on the other hand defends with knight f6. Then we see this typical structure, the Queen's Gambit, that Magnus Carlsen like to play, as we know. And Wesley, so we are going for this one. And in the background you can always see like the best move that the computer suggests. The knight goes here. Now Wesley so castles. Queen to b3. Usually you play queen to c2, but Magnus goes for queen c3. Wesley so then plays c5. Pretty logical move to support the bishop. And if the pawn gets captured, simply retreat the bishop. The pawn gets captured. And here, yeah, it's a good move to develop your knight. Wesley so goes for this variation. Since it's pretty much the only square, now you can kind of win a piece back with your knight to bring it into the game. Magnus Carlsen goes for this move right here, bishop to d2. Now bishop takes pawn. I don't know if bishop takes pawn was like the best move, I don't think so. Since it kind of blocks the knight. It kind of does, but it's alright. Magnus Carlsen plays this move here, pinning the knight. Wesley opening up the line for his bishop. Same as Magnus, and protecting the pawn at the same time. Wesley so goes for this one, and this bishop here is pretty strong. Like, if white will ever castle on the king's side, this pawn will be super weak, and the king in general will be weak since there's also this bishop, and the queen might jump to one of these squares. Magnus advances his bishop. Makes sense. And now Wesley again putting the bishop on this square right here, pinning the knight. He already moved this bishop like twice. And usually you should not do that, but it's Wesley so that knows what to do, and it also has a threat. Because now white plays a3 and Wesley answers with bishop takes knight. As you can see right here, like the engine bar gives black an advantage after this move here. That's because of this threat right here. Knight to c5, attacking the queen. If you think like it's a free pawn, you simply grab it, and as you can see the engine bar goes down and down. There's one square, and here, now the queen is pinned. That's why there was no need for Wesley basically to grab on this knight, because he could have developed one piece, at the same time attacked the queen and brought it back to a pretty bad square. But Wesley took this one here, took the knight. Magnus grabbing it back with the queen, double attacking the knight, forcing like if they trade off the pieces, having black a weak king side. But white should keep the queen on the board, because if close tries to win. Knight to e4. That's a tricky move since now both queens are attacked. That always needs kind of a deeper calculation. White takes the queen. Black takes the other queen, of course. And now, instead of grabbing the knight, he goes for this move, which makes totally sense, attacking the rook. Wesley so attacks the bishop once again. Bishop retreating one square, as you can see, like the computer suggests exactly the same move. And knight takes bishop. That's, I think, an important move, because then white doesn't have the bishop pair anymore, which is pretty strong in the endgame. It's usually, in my opinion, much stronger than two knights. King grabs knight, and now Wesley brings the other rook, like this one, into the game. I think it's better to use this rook instead of this one, because otherwise this rook just has no squares and not a big use. White brings his rook as well. Of course, defending this pawn, you will try never to play like a move like b3, because that just weakens your pawn structure like a lot. Because then a move like knight to c5 can really harm and damage your position. And Wesley goes for knight to this place, to c5. Magnus bringing his other rook into the action. Knight to e4, attacking the white bishop. Magnus advancing one of his pawns, yeah. And trying to get a better pawn structure. Like if you have all three pawns on this file, you've got a pretty decent queenside, which is pretty important in the endgame. Wesley going for f6. It's a computer suggested move. Usually you should never try to play this move, but since the queens are off the board and also like the light square bishop, this is a pretty good move to give your king space and develop it. White plays b3 to defend both the pawns. So now white can use also this rook right here, which is important. Maybe to double up rooks on one file. And Wesley blocks the pawns with this move right here. Bishop to a3. And now Wesley goes for d5. d5 pretty much like opening up the center and getting use of this weak pawn, because since it was also attacked, it's important to have the pawn now centralized. Magnus going for the best move, knight to d4, and Wesley takes on c4. Magnus captures with the pawn, and Wesley bringing his knight back to c5. Magnus now placing his knight in a brilliant square, where it can never be attacked except with the bishop, but you never try to exchange a bishop for a knight, which is placed in such an incredible position, because then your pawn structure will just get incredibly good and you will always have a weak pawn. So basically now I think Magnus will just try to trade off the knight, so we'll have the bishop against the knight, and as I said, the knight will never be traded and is in a much better place than the black bishop. Rook to d8, and now Magnus goes for the mentioned variation, very simply trades off the knight. And now Magnus goes for f3, defending this pawn. Could have gone for this variation as the computer said and exchanging one of the pieces, but he didn't go for that one. Now the king comes into the action, and Magnus going for e4. The next move that we have on the board is suggested computer move, bring the king into the action. Of course, since the closer your king is into the center in the endgame, the better it is. It can be a pretty strong piece in the center. And now Wesley goes for this move. I don't know if this move is one of the strongest one. Also, the computer didn't suggest it, because now white has another important square, this one. He can reroute simply his knight and bring it into this square. And here white will never capture it, because if he captures, then it has an incredible pawn chain. But now Magnus goes for the attack with g4. Wesley playing the computer suggested move, and now Magnus advancing another pawn. Wesley bringing his bishop in a better square to give space to rook, and they exchange rooks. And now it looks pretty drawish, since it's a kind of a close position and there's not much to do about it. Magnus is still trying to go for the win. That's why he keeps pushing. Bishop to e8, the computer suggested move is played. And now Magnus takes on, gives a check on f6. Wesley recaptures with a pawn. And now Magnus goes for this move right here, g1. I don't know if it's such a good move. We can all see the idea, like Magnus trying to place his rook into this square. Wesley tries to block it, and he thinks that he can get this pawn, but it's not that easy, as you can see, because he already defends the king. And now Magnus goes for this move. He probably didn't see Wesley playing simply a move like this, but as the computer suggests, the computer would go for this line right here, because now the rook has to retreat and this pawn is hanging. If the rook takes on into this square, it's trapped. It has no places to go. So there was no need for Wesley basically to move this pawn, but he did it anyways. And now Magnus going for the center of his pawns. Wesley putting his king there, and the rook retreats to the square where it came from. So basically now Magnus lost like 2 moves since he used the same rook like twice. He moved it twice. And Wesley grabbing the pawn. But since it seems like he's winning a pawn, but if the rook comes back, it's like a kind of double attack, and it's not that easy to win, especially as white. It's pretty difficult, and the only one that could win is eventually black, in my opinion. And the rook comes to c1, as I said. Now check. Gives check with the rook. Gives another check with the rook. The king comes back. And another check. And now, even though it kind of seems like black is 1 pawn up, it's still not that easy. It's pretty difficult. You could exchange it, since all pawns are no pawns are connected, it's even more difficult. Wesley attacking the other pawn, and Magnus just grabbing the first pawn. Same as Wesley, so and now attacking 2 pawns at the same time. And now, as we can see, he finds the best move, Magnus, which was pretty important, because otherwise he could have caused some trouble on the white's king. And Magnus, of course, grabbing the other pawn, trying to give his pawn some counterplay. And Wesley so basically playing the best move, putting his rook there, attacking the knight, and Magnus retreating it to d1. d1 is a square where you should not put your knight, but in this case it's probably the best move. The bishop then tries to attack the knight. Knight comes to e3, attacking the rook and the bishop. Wesley so continues with a check. The king retreats to e2, and as you can see, white is down 1 pawn, but if you look at the computer, it's pretty drawish. There's not much to do about it. They both take one of the pawns. And now Black kind of knows that it's almost impossible to win his position, and they just play for a draw. Basically, they exchange. And here Wesley, he doesn't even try to push it. I mean, the king is there and the knight, it's over. So he just attacks the knight, and agrees to the draw. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. That was game number 1 of the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour Eruo Rapid. Final number 1, and I hope I see you soon.